Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Police are believed to have identified several suspects behind the Novichok attack on Russian informant spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, using facial recognition technology. Reports on the US network CNN claim they are thought to be members of the Russian military intelligence service who've been traveling under other identities. This comes as the inquest into the death of the latest Novichok victim, Dawn Sturgis, opened today. Our reporter Ed Hauker is in Salisbury. Ed.
Well, major developments in this story today, John. So far as you know, up to 5 people have been poisoned and one of them has died. This morning, we understood that there was a report of an anonymous source who stated that there had been a development in the Metropolitan Police investigation and counter-terrorism operation to understand the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal and Julia's killers. The report stated that that there was an anonymous source, and that source said that using CCTV and the records of people coming in and out of the UK, they've been able to identify potential suspects. Well, you know that the situation is that the British government believes that the Russian state is responsible for all this, but at lunchtime, Ben Wallace, who is the security minister, stated that the report was ill-informed. Well, hours after President Putin hosted a summit in Moscow, which involved the British ambassador, CNN then reported that in fact there were 2 Russian suspects in this case, and that soon after the attack they left the UK and sent a message to Moscow, and that in that message to Moscow, which was coded, there was an interception by Britain in Cyprus, and as a result of that we now have a clearer sense of who's responsible.
Now, this morning
it's worth pointing out at this point that the Home Office has The Home Office hasn't confirmed any of this, and the Russian state continue to deny their involvement. Now,
this morning, as I mentioned, the inquest opened into Dawn Sturgis, the latest Novichok victim. What happened?
Dawn Sturgis's sister gave an incredibly compelling piece of testimony describing how there'd been a decision made to switch off the machines which provided oxygen to her, or reduced the amount of oxygen to her, and she said her goodbyes. Dawn Sturgis, a mother of 3, was a resident in the hostel just behind me, and a partner of Charlie Rowley, who remains in hospital and in a stable condition. But if it's the case that the suspects in this case are out of the country, how will justice be found in this case?
Ed Hauker in Salisbury. Well, now, in Moscow, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been hailing the success of his summit with Donald Trump. As Mr. Trump himself declared he wanted a second meeting to implement ideas they discussed in Helsinki. But what exactly did the 2 leaders agree? With no one but the interpreters in the room at the time, US politicians are demanding answers. Vladimir Putin has offered US investigators the 12 Russian military agents accused of hacking the 2016 US election campaign in exchange for Bill Browder. It is claimed that Putin wants the US to extradite Mr. Browder for questioning, despite the fact that he lives in England and is a British citizen. Critics have called the offer absurd, but President Trump's team say no concrete plans have been made.
There was some conversation about it, but there wasn't a commitment made on behalf of the United States, and the president will work with his team, and we'll let you know if there's an announcement on that front.
He was once one of Russia's biggest foreign investors, but now Bill Browder is one of the country's most wanted. In 2012, the hedge fund manager lobbied US Congress for a range of sanctions against powerful Russians, a move prompted by the death of his lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, who was investigating corruption. This legislation, named the Magnitsky Act, was signed into law by President Obama. The Russians accused Mr. Browder of financial fraud and tax evasion. In 2013, he was tried in absentia in Russia for tax fraud and was convicted and sentenced to 9 years in prison. But Interpol refused to arrest Mr. Browder, claiming the case was political. Well, I'm joined now from Aspen in Colorado by Bill Browder. Mr. Browder, I'm sort of a bit shy of even saying where you are. I mean, do you feel under direct threat yourself tonight?
Well, I'm always under direct threat, and actually you're under instructions not to say where I am, but so be that as it may. The situation is very grave. The Russian authorities have every interest in trying to destroy me, to kill me, to extradite me. They've made numerous attempts. Thankfully, I'm still alive, and 8.5 years after the beginning of this campaign. But Vladimir Putin hates me. He hates me very much because of this Magnitsky Act, which puts his money at risk. And so it is a very mortal battle that I have with him.
The idea that he would exchange 12 military suspects who are wanted by the United States for meddling in the US elections in exchange for you is probably unreal, isn't it? I mean, he would never want to trade 12 of his own people. And so to that extent, maybe you're okay tonight.
Well, I don't think I'm going to be arrested anytime soon in the United States, but the fact that first of all, the offer of those 12, as you say, is not sincere, as we all know, and we remember in the UK that when the British police went to interview Andrei Lugovoy, the suspect in the Litvinenko nuclear assassination in London, they came back and decided to charge him, and the Russian government and Vladimir Putin refused to hand over Lugovoy. That would be the same, which is true for these 12 people. And so no progress is going to be made in this supposed swap. But the fact that Putin discussed me and brought it up publicly shows how rattled he is by the Magnitsky Act. And I should point out that the UK has a Magnitsky Act now as well. And it's my hope and my goal that the UK starts to implement it very aggressively against human rights violators in the Putin regime.
But isn't it even more alarming that Mr. Trump, according to his own spokeswoman, admitted that he had talked about you too?
So I was the subject of their private conversation, and I was the subject of the press conference. And what was quite remarkable is that when pressed yesterday at the White House press briefing, Sarah Saunders didn't completely outright reject the idea that I could be swapped. Now, as I understand it, in the last couple of minutes, they have rejected that concept. But the fact that it's sort of hung out there for 3 days is quite extraordinary.
Now, you are a British citizen and you live in England. You presumably can look to the British authorities to protect you. Do you have that kind of confidence?
I do. The British government will protect me and has protected me from all sorts of legal onslaughts from the Putin regime. There have been 12 of these requests coming to the British government, and every one of these requests was immediately dismissed and rejected as a violation of British sovereignty. And so I feel completely legally protected in the United Kingdom. Now, of course, they could take extra legal measures, as they did with Sergei Skripal, and that's a much harder thing to protect oneself against.
So you would feel safer in Britain than in America?
Well, I would say that I don't feel particularly safe anywhere. I have to make my safety the best way I can. You have to understand that when you're up against a homicidal villain like Vladimir Putin, there's only so much you can do to protect yourself.
The fact is that we're looking into a very murky area of life, which is what happens to the dirty money that is being laundered through Russia into places like the United States and indeed into Britain. I mean, is there anything you can do to help on that front?
Well, yes, and I have been actively involved on that front. Since the murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, he was murdered over the expose of a $230 million government corruption scheme. And I've traced that money with my team over the last 8.5 years. We've had a full team of forensic investigators looking at that. And we found that money going into 26 different countries. And we now have 15 live law enforcement investigations into money laundering around the world. And in fact, the Magnitsky case is kind of a window into the world of Russian KGB organized crime and their money laundering. And it exposes a lot more than just the Magnitsky case. And so there's a lot of interest from governments, from Europol, and from everybody into how this whole works, how the whole thing works, so that it can create a template for how to fight a much broader problem.
Bill Browder, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, and well, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.